Welcome to our, let's see, this is still March, our March meeting of Seniors for Peace. And we have a guest speaker today, what we usually do, but I have a brief introduction for him. My name is Gary Heisler, and we're pleased to have Joel Kline with us today. And my first, I became aware of him when I got a copy of the Elizabethtown College Peace Fellowship newsletter that he edits. And so then I found out he lives in Fort Wayne, so he's not too far away from here. And you edit and have articles, and he's going to explain a little bit more about his background here in a moment. But he's a Elizabethtown College graduate, and he's been a Church of the Brethren pastor for many years. This is the information I was given, so if it's incorrect, let me know. And he was a pastor at Lincolnshire Church of the Brethren in Fort Wayne. Well, so much for this. I will turn the program over to Joel. Let's give him a round of applause and welcome.
Now, am I on? Okay, very good. Oops, excuse me. When Marie Willoughby asked me if I would share, it seemed like a good thing to do. Obviously, peace issues are very much at the heart of my faith and my convictions about what the world needs. And particularly is that true given the craziness of the political situation in particularly in the last, is it just 2 months? But it seems like a lot longer than that. Anyhow, let me just say a little bit about myself. I grew up as a pastor's kid in the Church of the Brethren, and I remember when I went off to college telling my folks that I had been to enough church to last me a lifetime, that I was finished with it, and then ended up being a pastor for 40 years. But ended my time in pastoral ministry with some of the same struggles that I had as I was trying to discern if this really is what I was meant to do. And that is just frustration with the church's struggles to be true to the convictions. Now, I don't even know how many of you are Church of the Brethren, but the Church of the Brethren is not the only denomination that struggles with living out its lofty convictions and ideals. Well, that was one of my struggles. I was I kind of coming of age in the 60s during the civil rights struggle and the anti-Vietnam peace movements, and it felt to me like the Church of the Brethren as a peace church tended to be pretty quiet about its convictions. And so one of the things that I struggled with is how, and I'm a part of that tradition, and there's kind of one of the struggles I had was how open to be about political differences, how open to be about on the one hand, the need to be very clear about our convictions about peace. On the other hand, as people who are concerned about reconciliation, how to do that in a way that you're not creating more division and causing people causing the rift to be even greater. And so that's just kind of a struggle that I had as I was entering into ministry, and it was a struggle I had as I was leaving ministry. Leaving ministry had more to do with the question of openness and welcome to LGBT folks, and the way in which too much of church leadership, from my perspective, was more concerned about maintaining the status quo and not rocking the boat than being true to convictions. So anyhow, that's maybe more than you need to know, but that's been my struggle. And I am finding in the current political climate that I feel this kind of increasing compulsion to speak forthrightly and directly. Again, I want to do that in a way that doesn't create more division. But that's a tough task. And so that's kind of what I wanted to think about. I want us to think about it. A couple of weeks ago, so I guess 2 months ago, I preached a sermon at, was the guest preacher at Manchester, Church of the Brethren. And the focus of that sermon had to do, I was preaching on the Sunday before the inauguration of the president and the annual celebration of Dr. King's birthday. And the contrast of values of those two things happening simultaneously, the juxtaposition of that is just mind-boggling to me and heart-wrenching as well. And Gary mentioned that I edit a newsletter called Kline, which is the newsletter of the Elizabethtown College Peace Fellowship. And our most recent issue that came out in January, it's twice yearly publication. The theme was Cultivating Beloved Community. Dr. King, of course, spoke frequently of the beloved community. And I want to begin just by reading just a bit of my intro to that issue. Throughout the course of his life and ministry, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made frequent use of the term beloved community. He saw his embrace of courageous nonviolence, his tireless efforts for racial justice, and his advocacy for economic parity as leading towards the creation of a beloved community. The minister and civil rights leader envisioned a community in which the dignity of all persons would be affirmed, a community that sees its mission and purpose as eliminating poverty, injustice, hunger, and violence. Recent trends, I guess I will read it because otherwise I'm going to forget the most important part. He in one of his earlier speeches, actually, he talked about the urgency of the hour, calling for leaders of wise judgment and sound integrity. Leaders not in love with money, but in love with justice. Leaders not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity. Leaders who can subject their particular egos to the greatness of the cause. And then let me just read this other paragraph. Recent trends in American life just point to a disturbing disparity with Dr. King's vision for beloved community. The results of the recent presidential campaign would suggest that far too many in our nation have chosen to move in a direction that runs counter to King's dream. Rather than celebrating the dignity of all persons, the American people have chosen as president-elect one who refers to political opponents as the enemy and to immigrants as vermin, while trashing the press and promising to revoke the broadcast licenses of networks whose coverage he does not like. Rather than embracing leadership displaying wise judgment and sound integrity, we have chosen as president-elect one who flaunts an alarming contempt for the truth and a disturbing dismissal of concerns for racial and economic justice. And rather than choosing leadership with the heart of a servant, we have opted for a president-elect who relishes the politics of revenge and retribution and who displays an authoritarian bent. Of course, in the days since, we've seen that it's not just an authoritarian bent. He's putting this into practice, folks, and it's really quite disheartening. And the thing that I most liken it to, um, almost 20 years ago, my first wife was killed in a car accident. And in the aftermath of that grief, I would daily wake up. The first thing I would say to myself is, this cannot have happened. This can't be happening. And I'm sure many of you know what that kind of grief is like. Well, circumstances might be different, but still. Well, I find myself daily waking up, seeing a headline or two, and I'm off. How can this be happening in a country that we have believed, for all its faults, was committed to the kind of politics that did seek to include people and to at least a surface attempt to work for justice. And while we have quite a bent for militarism in this country, we also have, there's been a side of us that has tried to be a force for good. And we just see that being eroded and eroded and eroded day after day. And so basically what I'm here to talk about is this disparity between whether you are faith-based or whether your conviction is simply from your own deepest values. But on the one hand, a vision of justice, a vision of peace, a vision of celebrating diversity and inclusion, versus an alternative vision that basically seeks to destroy all of that. We're treating our allies now as suspicious and really accusing them of things that just don't seem to be a part of reality. And we're embracing authoritarianism, and it's just so troubling. And so I don't mean to be just a person of doom and gloom, but that's kind of when I think about cultivating beloved community, in order to work at cultivating beloved community, we have to confront the forces that are working to undermine any movement towards beloved community. One of the authors I particularly appreciate is a Catholic priest named John Deere. He's written a book, a recent book. It's actually a commentary on Matthew, Mark, and Luke from the perspective of nonviolence, and it's entitled The Gospel of Peace. I've only started to read it, but he has a wonderful introduction about the nonviolence teachings of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And in that, he talks about King's drawing contrast between negative peace and positive peace. I just want to read a bit of that for you. Negative peace is no peace at all, said Dr. King, but a kind of false peace, a veneer of peace, an absence of tension that only comes at the expense of justice. which sweeps issues under the rug and maintains an air of civility and the pretense of peace in the midst of systemic injustice, warfare, widespread violence, racism, poverty, nuclear weapons, and environmental destruction. Negative peace leads to complacency and the normalization of violence. Positive peace, on the other hand, seems loud, messy, disruptive, tense, risky, and frightening as it publicly resists systemic injustice, agitates for justice, and tries to reconcile and create the beloved community. It does not look or feel peaceful at all because it engages systemic injustice and violence and exposes fear, hostility, hatred, and division in the process of social transformation. It is the peace of peaceful means engaging the culture of violence and war for peaceful ends. And so it demands our full attention, faith, fearlessness, mindfulness, commitment, steadfastness, and forgiveness. In the short term, there seems nothing peaceful about positive peace, but in the long term, it brings new depths of lasting social peace based in justice. Those seem such powerful words and just remarkably descriptive of the struggle that we are facing today. And again, from Dr. King's words, back in the 50s, he did a speech called Facing the Challenge of a New Age. And he talks about how we stand between two worlds, the dying old and the emerging new. And it makes me think, when I ponder those words, it makes me think that perhaps in recent years we've become somewhat complacent. You think about how impactful the civil rights movement and the peace movements were in the 60s. But also when you think about the resistance to those movements, sometimes because we have made some progress, of course, but we forget just how desperately the dying old world is to maintain its power and its position. And it seems to me that that speaks to the way in which President Trump and his enablers and cronies really go about it. They are responding out of a need for position and power and control rather than any sense of there just is no sense of having a heart of a servant in that. It's just not a part of his understanding of leadership. So anyhow, the death groans of a dying system. One of my other all-time favorite books. I probably have to be careful how I say this, but sometimes I think I use this as much as I do the Bible these days, but it is entitled A Testament of Hope. It's just a compilation of the essential writings and speeches of Martin Luther King Jr. And I just turn to this with great regularity, and I want to read from that speech that I was talking about. So he talks about the death groans of a dying system. Through our scientific genius, we have made of the world a neighborhood. Now, through our moral and spiritual genius, we must make of it a brotherhood and sisterhood. We are all involved in this single process. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are links in the great chain of humanity. He talks about countering the dying gasp of the old age with the values and hopes and dreams of the new age, and that we need to do that with understanding and goodwill. And you, of course, remember how deeply rooted he was in nonviolence, and how he talked about confronting the evils of our day with soul force. And the goal always in confronting racism was reconciliation, not creating greater animosity, but really seeking to turn enemies into friends. And he frequently used the phrase, the end, much of violence is bitterness and division. The end of the end of non is reconciliation, redemption, and the creation of beloved community. And so the editorial team that's a part of the work I do with Kline are three Church of the Brethren pastors, and we, as we're approaching a new issue, we spend time talking about what are the issues of the day, what should we talk about. Anyhow, we spent a lot of time in choosing the theme about beloved community, what word to put before. And we finally came up with cultivating. Embracing seemed too simple, a little too mild. Cultivating, it's hard work. So using the analogy of cultivating, it's not something that just comes to us automatically. This requires our passion, our energy, our commitment, our time. And so again, that comes back to the issues related to the sermon I preached a couple of weeks ago. That how do we deal? How do we make sense of the marked contrast of values here? And what do we do with the fact that vast portions of the church in America is choosing not the vision of beloved community and of nonviolence and the ways of King and Gandhi, but instead have joyfully, it would appear, embraced the kinds of values that we are seeing lived out now as our people we care about are belittled and mistreated. In my own family, my daughter-in-law grew up in Nicaragua and is now a citizen of this country, but her sister is here on a legal visa, and you may have read that Trump has, in the last week or so, simply revoked the visas of more than 500,000 Nicaraguans, Colombians, like Guatemalans, perhaps. I can't remember. There's a fourth country. So I think of her as part of my family. She's my daughter-in-law's sister. Was here saying, what am I going to do? And it's further complicated, of course. In Nicaragua, the leadership there is authoritarian, kind of but not in quite the same way as Trump seems to be displaying. But he has declared any Nicaraguans who intentionally moved out of the country as traitors, and that if they come back to the country, they will be put in jail. So she doesn't have the option of going home to see her family. It's looking more and more like she can't stay here. And so their family's in touch with immigration lawyers to try to figure out, is there any way of working this out? But you don't have rational conversations with people whose fundamental basis is racism and hatred and disdain towards people who aren't rich white men. That's where we are, and it's just an appalling situation from my perspective. And again, I keep coming back to this struggle of how do we work at holding fast to our convictions, speaking firmly against the trends, the movements that just seem to be undermining basic humanity, civilization. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't just make the rift that much stronger? How do you find common ground with people who don't want common ground? I guess that's really the crux of the issue. And so, there's just so many ways in which we struggle with this. I understand we allow for some time of questions here. I think maybe that would be that we ought to just kind of move in that direction, or responses or comebacks at me, whatever you want to do. But Gary has a microphone, so if you have something you would like to share, just let him know and he'll bring you the mic.
Should we really be surprised by this? One reason I mention that is, well, many of the people that are bringing the hopeful things, like you mentioned, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he actually faced death.
Of course. Yeah.
And we're in this season now leading up to triumphal entry and the cross. And during those times, Jesus was talking a lot more about the coming of his death. And that just seemed to be, no way, Jose, that there's not right. But Jesus didn't back away from that. He set his face toward Jerusalem like it was a necessary part of the thing. So it's part of what our struggle is, that we want to have the end results that Jesus preached and taught about, but we don't want to face up to the realities that there's actual death dynamics and overcoming the fear of that, where it seems like many of the people that challenge me the most along that line have been African Americans, indigenous peoples who've been through that kind of thing. And to further, when there's these wonderful breakthroughs like the civil rights movement, there's also then the backlash. And so that's a reality too. So those are all part of this big puzzle, and we just like to use certain pieces, and some others like certain pieces, but Jesus seemed to have a bigger connection with a whole bunch of pieces.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, as Jesus enters Jerusalem, in Luke's gospel, told that his cry is, "Would that you knew the things that make for peace." And we're still there. And you're right, there is that I would like to believe that all we have to do is have a conversation and we can come to understanding. Clearly, you don't get any better example than Jesus of, conversation alone didn't work. And the same with King. On the night before he was assassinated, he said, "I may not have a long life." That we all know that speech, and I don't know if I have the courage to be that outspoken if I were the target of death threats and all that kind of thing. I don't know, because I haven't experienced that. But it is what it requires. I mean, what it says is, these are times to call for courage. These are times there is an urgency. Dr. King talked about the urgency of the now. Well, the now is still with us. And so what do we do? I think it's helpful to bring in the faith perspective. There's a verse of scripture in Jeremiah. You may remember it's actually repeated twice, once in chapter 6 and once in chapter 8, where Jeremiah is lamenting those in his day who cry out, "Peace, peace," when there is no peace. And then he goes on and says, they no longer feel any shame. They no longer know how to blush. And it seems to me that when we hear many of the voices in the current administration talk about themselves as somehow purveyors of justice and of integrity, when we all know that it's so much of it's based on a lie, then I just think of that verse so often. They no longer know how to blush. Yes.
Thank you, Gary. I heard your sermon 2 months ago. It was very good. I was hoping to come here and get some answers.
Yeah.
You don't have any answers. I hear that.
Yeah.
You know what to do, and I know what to do, but doing it is another thing.
May I have your attention? May I have your attention, please? I am sad to share with you about the death of Ann Johnson. Ann passed away last evening. We extend our sympathy to her family and friends, especially to Wayne. Again, I am sad to share with you about the death of Ann Johnson.
wish I could be a little more explicit about what I have to say. My Parkinson's is not a fun thing. But as a young man, I was in Vietnam as a teacher there. I think I told you this that morning as you preached over there. And okay, there we go. And I'm just frustrated right now because I don't know what to do. As an old man with Parkinson's, I even have less ability to do anything. But I think what you're doing is absolutely correct. But how can we actually make a difference? I mean, these people of Trump, these people are mean, ugly liars, and they're hard to deal with. I just don't know what to do.
Yes. My wife Donna and I live in a neighborhood in Fort Wayne that, for the most part, allows us sometimes to lose sight of the political climate in Indiana and the rest of the country. It's not sure quite how it happened, but a lot of quite like-minded people. Anyhow, we knew that at least quite a number of our neighbors just were lamenting after the election, lamenting the results. And so we invited 15 or so people to come just to talk about what do we do with all this. And the first time, I don't know, we had 12 or 15 come, and we just talked about the need to lament. We need to allow some time for that. One of our neighbors who has a ministry in Fort Wayne aimed specifically at ending gun violence, shared about how many of his African American friends were saying in the aftermath of the election, we've been through this before. And that was really important to hear, because intellectually I knew that, but what it triggered, I think, Roger, for me was, but to a certain extent, I hadn't really internalized. I thought I had, but I'm not sure I really understood until he said that, like, just how deep, how many years our African American brothers and sisters lived in a country that told them they were second class or worse. And how, just in a very small way, that's kind of how I think many of us are feeling now. It's like the values that we trusted on. I know that the world around us doesn't just joyfully embrace the teachings of Jesus. But, we have a lot of the right language, and you kind of get into a sense that, oh yeah, we're at least a receptive place. That group has continued to meet monthly, and again, we don't have answers, but we've been talking about what can we do in our community. And I think just being with other people who are sharing concerns, rather than putting our heads in the sand and pretending this isn't happening, that there's something of value in that. And just the other day in Fort Wayne, there was a town hall meeting by there's a group called Indivisible Northeast Indiana, which had invited Senators Banks and Young and our representative Stutzman to come to a town hall meeting. Of course, they all refused. And so we had a town hall meeting with cardboard cutouts of the three of them at the front, and then two state Democratic Congress people answering questions. But it was just an opportunity for people to share their deep concerns about what's going on in our country, and you know, at all of these different levels. And there's just Gene Roop and Roger shared that there is an attempt now to have a nationwide peaceful protest in Washington, D.C. and the 50 state capitals. On Saturday, April 5, there's one at the Indiana State House, downtown Indianapolis, from 12 to 4. There is also one in Fort Wayne scheduled for that day. I think it starts at noon, and it's on the courthouse green. So it feels like too little, too late. But you know, I think the genius of Trump and his group is they just keep going. They just keep putting one thing after another out in front of you, and you just begin to say, I can't cope with all this. And so I seldom watch news these days. I read the headlines because I can't not read them, but I just can't. And there was when I did watch news the other day, there was a clip of the Colombians who were supposed gang members taken to a prison in El Salvador. And I'm waking up at night with the images of that in my head, and I don't know. It's I don't know. I think we need to be informed. I think we also need to figure out how much we can. How do we cope with all this? And so we also need to do self-care, as I'm talking about the need for courage in moving out. We also need self-care. And I think that's part of the value of finding a group of people with common concerns. One small group can't change it, but somehow back in the 60s, the whole civil rights peace movements began to snowball. And I just have the hope that we're at that kind of beginning point where this is going to begin to come together. People are. It was this town hall there were 300 or 400 people at the Allen County Library. It was a hopeful thing to hear people say, just express their concerns, their frustrations, their hurts, their hopes. And again, it was that reminder that, oh, you know, sometimes you begin to think, well, maybe I'm in this all alone. So that's part of it. I think just to be in groups like this, to hear one another, to uphold one another, support one another, encourage one another is what we can do. Sorry if I don't have better answers than that. We're probably near our ending time. Is there anybody else wants a final word? Ken.
A number of weeks ago, Bob Gross and Annalisa Gross invited people, and people could invite people to come to some meetings that he called people interested in affinity groups, so that we had similar concerns, hopes, dreams, things that you've been talking about what's going on in our world. And they identified a number of actions people could take, and they mentioned Indivisible and a number of groups that we could be a part of. But the hope is that the people who attended those groups might find people with common interests here in this community and figure out ways that fit how they deal with things. to make their voices and their hopes and dreams known, and hopefully make a difference. And I haven't heard a whole lot. I know they have a website now that people can go on, and I haven't been on it to see exactly how it works, but there's an attempt locally to, bring us together. And
Yeah.
hopefully those kinds of things I know they're happening a lot of places. And maybe we'll get some of that movement
Yeah.
going.
Excellent. Okay. I do have, if any of you are interested, copies of the most recent issue of Plumline, the newsletter that I edit about this one about beloved community. On the back page, if you would like to subscribe, you don't have to be a E-Town graduate. If you would like to subscribe to this newsletter, my email address or phone number is here. Just let me know. So if you'd like a copy of this, feel free to take one before you leave. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Joel. We like to hear about positive things that we can be involved in, and you've shared some of those. I know actually from a TV program I watch, which I won't name, but she often starts her program with a lot of little videos running of the demonstrations all over the country, and sometimes Indiana, anyway, lots of places. So I think there are things. It's not hopeless just yet, I think. I hope anyway. So anyway, thank you for your encouragement, and we appreciate you coming.
Glad to be here. These here.